Okay, welcome everyone. Just letting a few more people join the webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got a fantastic talk ahead with Marydee Ojala today. So big thank you from SLA Europe for today's webinar. We're all here for kind of changes that have been happening with AI in recent weeks. There's going to be fantastic discussion, but yeah, please do feel free to submit your questions, any comments that you have throughout the webinar this evening. And I will be chairing any questions at the end for the last 10 to 15 minutes, and then pass these to Marydee, so we will have a discussion. But otherwise, I will hand over to Marydee to start off our webinar.
Okay, well, thanks. So we're going to talk about AI-driven search. Few words about who I am in case you don't know me. I'm the editor of Online Searcher, which is now part of Computers and Libraries magazine. I'm also the editor of ILI 365 e-News. That's a free newsletter. It shows up the first Tuesday of every month at infotoday.eu. And I've also become the editor-in-chief for KM World, which is obviously all about knowledge management. And then we do stuff with tech and library conferences. I just wanted to point out that I've been a member of SLA for a very long time, and it's been a big part of my professional life. And SLA Europe has been absolutely instrumental in everything that I did. So yes, support your SLA. And I don't know if Sheila's on the call, but thanks, Sheila. This is her AI rendition of me. I don't know if that actually looks like me. My hair is not quite that red, but thanks, Sheila. Couple words to echo what Julia just said about annual conference. Yes, if you're coming to Detroit, maybe you can skip this session. Then again, maybe not. If you are coming, for some reason, SLA has a different title for this talk. It's called Transformational Technology of Search. So that's what it will be in Detroit. I don't know why. Remember, it is also, you can also attend the conference hybrid. So do come, and I do look forward to seeing as many of you as possible. So let's get into it. This is sort of my concept of the trajectory of search technologies. And honestly, traditional search has been around for decades. It showed up in the 1970s with all those revolutionary developments such as dialogue. Some of you, I'm sure, remember dialogue, which is still around in a different format. The next revolution showed up in the 1990s, and that was algorithmic search, and that really was Google. The newest search technologies we're seeing, this whole bit about AI driven, and everybody is getting into the act with ChatGPT implementations, talks about large language models. This has really put a new dimension on the whole area of search for information professionals. And discovery changes, just trying to discover information. Machine learning has always been a part of this, but with our AI-enabled search, it's different. Metadata. This again is not particularly new, but think about how much metadata can be machine generated, and it can be dynamic. You can change something on the fly. Another thing that AI has been very good for is automatically summarizing things. So articles, even books, probably this talk, but it's what we've seen in this trajectory is revolution after revolution. And keep in mind that artificial intelligence has been around since the 1950s, but increases in bandwidth have made it a much more feasible technology. And what are some of the technologies that fall under that general rubric of artificial intelligence? Obviously, machine learning, natural language processing, not particularly new technologies, but gaining a lot more prominence these days. Deep learning and textual analysis, pattern recognition, which is a big part of machine learning. I could have put in here sort of falls into deep learning, sort of falls into textual analysis. Even newer, we see things like vectorization, which is closely aligned with knowledge graphs. A lot of what we're seeing with the Chat GPT has to do with neural networks and neural hashing. Basically, this changes how we search. It changes how publishers publish, which in turn affects how we as information professionals do research. So I just wanted to go through a couple of acronyms. AI, obviously artificial intelligence. Other people see it as augmented intelligence. I think I probably lean more towards the augmented than the artificial because it's not all that artificial. ML, machine learning, GPT, generative pre-trained transformer, sometimes transformers, plural, pretty much same for the acronym. NLP, natural language processing, TDM, text and data mining, something that information professionals have been deeply involved in for years, and some in the enterprise are just stumbling over it now. It's so funny to hear people talk about, oh, I just discovered this thing called text mining. Oh my gosh. And you're kind of sitting there thinking, yeah, we've been doing this for a long time, people. LLM, large language models, and of course, that most wonderful of acronyms, TLA, which stands for three-letter acronym. So what are some of the characteristics that we see of AI-driven search engines? Well, the first thing, if you were taught all about keywords and all about constructing elaborate Boolean search strategies, forget it, because that's not useful for AI-driven search engines. What they're looking at is extractive answers, which means it's not finding just exactly the words that you entered into your search box. It's looking at other words, concepts that might answer the question. It's looking at the context and going away from blue links. Now, from an information professional perspective, I've always thought of blue links as sort of a rudimentary bibliography. So my mindset is, well, I'm okay with blue links. Many people are not, and they are disappearing. We are seeing queries as questions rather than search statements. If you remember back when Google first showed up, they had a little search box. It was actually pretty small, and you couldn't put more than 10 words in there. And so you were very limited in what you could do. Now they are saying, no. Put your query in as an actual question, as if you were talking to somebody. So instead of saying chlorine, you would say, how much chlorine should be put in a public swimming pool to make sure that everybody is safe? The results, these are based on the large language models and on APIs. The whole notion of AI-driven search is conversational. And ChatGPT, is anybody else tired of hearing about ChatGPT? It's driving search, or at least it's driving people's interest in search. Let me be clear, I do not think that ChatGPT is the equivalent of searching. So here's kind of the way I was thinking about the three categories of AI-driven search. First of all, the Google alternatives. And I stress that when I came up with these categories, I was thinking about recent developments, because Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, they've always used some form of AI, search algorithms, machine learning. So it's not that I am ignoring any of that. You and I both know it's out there, it's important. We have seen so many companies try to be Google killers. They have not succeeded. So maybe some of the newer search engines will become Google killers. We don't know yet. We haven't had enough time to figure this out. But what they are, all of them, is general search engines. They're out there for the consumers. They're out there to answer any question from a high-level research inquiry to where's the closest restaurant that serves pizza. Why is it always pizza? I don't know. And then the second one is the scholarly search. We have some very interesting developments there. Most of them, well, many of them restricted to science. How this has happened is basically because of open access. AI-driven search engines cannot get behind paywalls. So as soon as you have a lot of literature that is open access, then the search engines can find it. And the third category being the large language models. And let me remind you that ChatGPT is not the only one out there. There are others, and even ChatGPT has different versions. We're up to 4 at the moment. ChatGPT itself is based on 3.5, moving into 4, and then there are also twigging of this. It's open source, so there are variations on this, but they are language models. They are not search engines and absolutely reliant on training data, something I'm going to touch on a little bit later. So here are the 3 Google alternatives for general search that I think are important. The search engines that give users control over the results is how Dirk Lewandowski characterized it. He wrote last month's feature article for the ILI 365 newsletter. It's a fairly short article. I would say that he talks about these 3 in that little article. He also just published a book. I don't know, can you see this? Yes. No, there you go. So this is a book he just published, Understanding Search Engines, published by Springer. I think it actually only came out last week. But what he was talking about in the ILI newsletter was what 3 things that really make this different. Searchers can influence the rankings because they can state their preferences. You can upvote, you can downvote. You can have different interpretations of the web's content, which I find really interesting because to my mind, that means it allows us to concentrate on what we want. So many searches that you run on Google end up giving you things that are peripheral to what you really want, because the general public is asking questions that sound like what we're asking, but what we're asking is much more detailed and different. So the newer search engines may be able to help us with that. So let me start with Neva. I do find a certain irony in Neva, started by ad executives from Google, and it's an ad-free search engine. Love it. So at the moment, Neva is available in Germany, France, the UK, the US. You can ask for it to operate in German, French, or English. I'm assuming they will expand that as we go on. There is a free version and a paid version. Paid version is $20 a month. It does have databases for images, for maps, news, including news alerts. You can set up alerts on Neva. Apps. With the apps, you can, for free, connect to Dropbox, Office 365, which is now called Microsoft 365, but Neva is still calling it Office 365. And some others. Most of the others are available on a premium basis, which means they are not free. Spaces is where you can create topics and save information. They have a knowledge panel, which is not just Wikipedia. Google's pretty much is just Wikipedia. And prioritizing sources, meaning you can personalize your search. Neva AI. Now, this I find kind of funny because Neva AI is a direct reaction to ChatGPT's popularity, but Neva was always AI. So exactly how you have Neva saying, we're an AI-based search engine, and then, oh, now we have something new, it's Neva AI. It's funny. So what the LLM does for Neva AI is provide answers dynamically, and I'll show you some examples of this. It also provides citations, and like so many of these newer search engines, their citations are really not what you and I would consider a citation. Because it doesn't drill down to where the information actually is. It typically just gives you a high-level URL. And the AI part of Neva really works best when you have a summary. You're asking for an opinion, like, is spinach good for you? So this is what the homepage looks like. Now you'll notice, first of all, that if you go in to just neva.com, if you haven't registered, you won't see a website that looks like this. This is the website you see. So I'm based in the US, so I'm seeing the AI beta piece down here. So over on the left, you see the place for the apps to connect to, spaces where you can put things. Settings is where you can change your country, language, etc. Up at the top there, you'll see the various databases that they are using. The very first, so I was asking for the health hazards of vinyl chloride. The first thing that I get is a very reputable site, the CDC from the United States government. If you scroll down, you will find many more citations, all of which are from very reputable sources. The AI beta piece here is writing in conversational language what the health hazards are. And then over there on the other side, you'll see related searches. And that the related searches are things that are pulled from its experience with other people putting in search statements. This is what the AI synopsis gives you for vinyl chloride, along with that picture of a guy in a hard hat, which I don't know. I'm not sure that's a great picture, but that's what the CDC gives you. Brave Search is the next one I was going to move into. Brave Search started out as a browser. It became a default for, if you're using the Brave browser, the Brave Search became the default if you're in France, Germany, UK, US. And this is the exact quote from the website, which really is pretty strong. You know, we're an independent, privately held company. We're not beholden to any other tech company. And working to fight tech's terrible privacy abuses, Brave exists to help real people, not some faceless tech company. So, you think they have an opinion? You bet they have an opinion. Brave is interesting because it has its own index, it has its own ranking algorithms. It is not relying on Google or any of the other search engines that we traditionally have thought of as search engines. Goggles is pretty interesting. It's still in beta. So here's what the results look like from my search on vinyl chloride. It starts out with cancer.gov, moves down into CDC and some other government sites, all very reputable. So I then say, okay, I'm going to go over to Goggles. And what Goggles does is lets you discover various pieces of how you can change your perspective on the search. Do you want, for this one, do you want technology? Do you want left wing? Do you want right wing? Do you want hacker news? You can customize this to whatever it is that you personally are interested in, or what your company, your employer is interested in. So this is customizable. I have not customized this. I just wanted to show you what it looks like for this particular search. U.com is probably the newest of all these. It is funded by venture capital, which always makes me a little bit nervous. And like the other two that I've already mentioned, no ads, no tracking, privacy is paramount. started by a former chief scientist at Salesforce. And I will confess that when I first looked at U.com, it seemed to me that it was all about products. It was all about surfacing products that would meet your search criteria. I think that has changed. I think it's gotten much more diverse, and I think it has taken on from what searches have been run against it. It is said, well, no, we need to be a little more general. It is the results, its original search results were all in this tiled rows of horizontal panels, which it calls apps. And what I've noticed lately is that sometimes results show up that way and sometimes they don't. If you're searching, you can promote a panel, you can demote a panel. So this is, again, to Dirk's idea of you, the searcher, are in charge. And you do have these results from the web, got an image database, video, and so on. It just added chat, again, based on those GPT LLMs. So this is the homepage, and you can see they've got the chat up there. It'll do coding, it'll help you write, all of this based, again, on the generative models. Here's what's weird about it. Is it Bing or is it not Bing? If this doesn't confuse you, you can explain it to me because it confused me. So it says up here, it does not use Microsoft Bing. And then it says, others on U.com are powered by Bing. Okay. So I asked it for an opinion. I wanted to know, does daylight saving time save energy? Daylight saving time, of course, is what we call it here in the US. For the rest of you, you may find it summertime and wintertime. But does it really save energy? And it gives me some tiles up there, gives me related searches, and then it gives the UChat up here. Hello, my name is UChat. Sigh. Okay. Click here to talk to me and get an AI generated answer. And so I said, all right, here you go. And this is the answer from UChat. Again, very conversational. And this is what characterizes the GPT LLMs. Let's move on to scholarly searching. So here are some of the most well-known. Obviously, Google Scholar. It's been around for 20 years, so I'm sure you've used it for one reason or another. It is the traditional Google. I never thought I would say traditional Google, but that's what it is. And it's going by algorithmic search. As you know, it's got full text, it's got abstracts, it's got citations, and integrated into many, many, many higher education libraries. It has not changed. So while Google has been deeply involved with AI, Google Scholar just keeps plugging along. So some questions about its future. Semantic Scholar, you may have used. This comes out of the Allen Institute for AI, released in 2015, has about 210.5, probably up to 211 by now, million papers. This was a number from about a week and a half ago. And it works very cooperatively with other scholarly search engines. So when I said, okay, Semantic Scholar, what are you doing about all this chat GPT stuff? The answer was, we're investigating it. So not clear what that's going to mean. It has not changed a lot over the past few years, other than adding more content. It's added a reader. It's always been working on improving its APIs. There's a lot of APIs that underlie the whole system. So yes, they're moving, but I would say they're moving rather slowly. Search results, this looks a whole lot like those blue links again. Interesting ways that you can sort, interesting ways that you can filter, but basically untouched by the GPT models. Elicit is much more interesting. So Elicit says it's a research assistant, and it's very distributed. It's using Semantic Scholar's APIs. It's taking rankings from one of the twigs of GPT-3, and the abstracts are from another twig of the GPT-3. So what it claims it can do is find relevant papers, even if you don't give it a perfect keyword match, which actually is not particularly new. That's really what AI is all about. That's what machine learning is all about. If you were, for example, and this is true even on Google, if you are searching something as simple as cat, in the old days, you would have to say cat or cats or feline, or whatever other word you might think of for a cat. Why Elicit thinks this is truly miraculous, I'm not quite sure, because it's pretty common. However, the generating of abstracts is quite new, and the ranking, again, when it's a ranking determined by the GPT as opposed to whatever algorithms Google might use, we really don't know what that actually means. But this is what Elicit looks like. The training data here is coming entirely from scholarly papers, which makes it very different from those general search engines that we talked about earlier, like Neva. What Elicit encourages you to do if you are a scholar is to upload your own papers and run the search against your own papers to test out how good it is. Is it pulling the things that you, as the author of the papers, think it ought to be pulling? So here's some results that I found for my effects of vinyl chloride on the environment search. So we're given a bibliography, essentially. Here's the paper title, the abstract summary. That is what is written by the AI. And you've got various ways you can filter and sort. You can limit to whether the paper is available as a PDF or not. And you can refine your search in various ways over on the left there. So I then filtered by after 2022, because, as you know, ChatGPT ends in 2021. So if you wanted really recent things, could you find them? The answer is yes, you can. Consensus is, somebody commented on Consensus that if ChatGPT and Google Scholar got married, Consensus would be their child. Notice that it is a .app. It is in partnership with Semantic Scholar, with several of these others, and it was heavily for a while into NLP to do the data labeling. The newest thing you can see from Consensus is this thing they're calling Consensus Meter, which is an opinion answerer. So here's what Consensus looks like. Again, it's all research papers. So your training data all comes from research papers, not from just the general web. It gives you some suggestions down there. Once you sign into Consensus, you will get an email at least once a week, often more frequently, suggesting searches you can run or telling you about new stuff. This morning, in fact, they said they've started a whole Slack channel for Consensus, for the Consensus community to get together and talk about whatever they want to talk about, I suppose, that has to do with Consensus. Consensus suggests that this is a good way to suggest improvements to the service. So I found that quite interesting. I also love the way everything is always in beta. So here's search results from Consensus, the effects of vinyl chloride on the environment again. And notice these are not blue links. This is not really a bibliography the way some of these other search engines have presented their results. It highlights the summarization that was written by the AI to answer the question, and then down at the bottom tells you the citation to the paper. Here's what Meter looks like. So I asked it, do video games encourage violence? And what it does is go through all of the papers it has in its database and decide, it basically does sentiment analysis, okay? So it says, okay, here are the ones that think yes, here are the ones that think no, and you can see the results here. Okay, some studies suggest that exposure increases aggression and others don't. So the yes, 62%, no was 38%, and absolutely nobody was in the middle on this one, which obviously for the Meter, it depends on what question you ask it, whether it will be predominantly yes, no, or somewhere in the middle there, but I can't decide. Perplexity.ai in many ways is more powerful than Consensus, but Consensus is getting more publicity. It's basically text generation, and if you look at the founders, it's really fascinating where they came from, because they're from all over the map, all kinds of AI companies, and the University of California, Berkeley. It does generate real citations. The Consensus citations are much more exacting. Perplexity AI, if it's a website, you'll only get the top level. You can expand the answers by asking questions again. So here's what the Perplexity homepage looks like. You can join a waitlist for iPhone. So these are some of the popular ones. I'm fascinated by the snowflake question. I'm not actually sure that all snowflakes have 6 points, but maybe they do. So what are the health benefits? Now here I asked it for an opinion, and it gave me an opinion, and you'll see it's got footnotes in there. Then you click on sources, you ask it for sources, and it comes back and gives you the high level sources, does not get down into the weeds of that. But it then says, oh, here's some related questions that you might be interested in. So it then encourage you to ask follow-up questions. This, I think, is one of the hallmarks of GPT search engines, AI search engines, that they encourage this conversation. You're not supposed to just ask a question, get an answer, and leave. You're supposed to follow up and say, oh, well, but what about this? But what about that? Have you thought about this? So this is how Perplexity does it. They make it much more explicit that, yes, you're supposed to have a conversation. Well, let's talk about ChatGPT, because why not? It only came in as November 2022 as an experiment. And OpenAI, I think, was as much taken aback as everybody else by the reaction, which was basically everybody freaked out. The freemium model introduced in January, and search engine companies went berserk. Educators, librarians, the legal community, journalists, everybody said, what is going on? Is this going to change life as we know it? Will this put me out of a job? Are all my students going to be using this to avoid writing papers? How do I tell if a student has written this paper as opposed to an AI? Librarians, as we know, ChatGPT hallucinates, creates citations. The legal community is saying, wait a minute, ChatGPT says if you ask it the right question, it can pass bar exams. And journalists are saying, who do I trust? So pretty much everybody freaked out over ChatGPT, and is, I think, still freaking out. So let's talk about LLMs. So this is probably one of those 3-letter acronyms that people had not heard of before. Now everybody has. If you're in computer science, it's not that new, because it's all based on neural networks, and neural networks are not new. So what you have here basically is deep learning algorithms, and what they can do is look at these massive data sets and make connections, summarize things. I know that ChatGPT, I know people who have had conversations with ChatGPT in languages that are pretty far away from English, like Czech. And yes, they say this works pretty well. Don't know how many of you recognize the name of Timnit Gebru. She was the AI expert at Google who was fired by Google for suggesting that these models don't always work as well as they should. Just because they're big doesn't mean they're good or accurate. And she called it a stochastic parrot. I love that phrase, stochastic parrot. So a stochastic parrot, I mean, basically what she's saying is just because you have a huge language model that you can statistically analyze, that does not mean you can precisely predict things from that analysis. The biggest concern is about bias. So we know that a training set matters. Just because it's large doesn't necessarily eliminate bias. There was a program on here in the United States, National Public Radio, I was listening to in the car this morning, and they were talking about a study from MIT. It was a frightening study, really, because what they did was take the medical literature. That was their model, medical literature. So this is a constrained body of knowledge. This is not the general web. And they asked it to fill in the blank on a sentence, which was a white, middle-class male exhibited violent tendencies. And the suggestion from the AI model was this person should be admitted to a hospital. When the exact same question was posed, but the individual presenting the violent symptoms was Black, African American, or African, the AI suggestion was this person should be admitted to jail. That's scary. So is large better than small? Depends on what you're looking for. So if we're talking about my first category, which is general sort of consumer-based search engines, then large is probably good. If you were talking about scholarly literature, then you probably want something that's a bit smaller. You wanted something that is controlled, but you then have to go the next step and say, okay, but should I actually control further for bias? There are ways to do that. They can be a bit complicated. So let's talk about Microsoft. I'm sure you've heard of this company. They have invested billions in OpenAI, which is the company behind ChatGPT, but it's not really, they've been looking at AI for a long time. Remember Paul Allen, whose institute was all about AI. He was one of the founders. There's also within Microsoft an AI research team, but they came out with Bing Chatbot, the new Bing, which they probably had always intended to do, but I think everybody was surprised by that November launch of ChatGPT, where everybody in the world was getting very excited about it, and companies decided they had to say, yes, we're doing it too. We're important. We're doing it too. So when they introduced it, probably a little early, not quite ready for prime time, but it's getting much better. It's only available on the Edge browser. And there are people who have said, you know, the Bing chat, this has done the absolute impossible. It's actually convinced people to search Bing. I read a statistic yesterday. Okay, it's only on Edge, but they've analyzed what searcher behavior is. So people want to try out Bing Chat. Okay, perfect. So they have to go to the Edge browser. So they go to the Edge browser. And yes, usage of Edge browser has gone way up. But once they're on the Edge browser, they then search Google. Okay. So Bing Chat, here's something you can do that I have not seen elsewhere. You can choose your conversation style. So you can be creative, you can be balanced, or you can be precise. So I chose balanced. If I were doing a research project, I would probably choose precise. If I was writing, say, oh, I don't know, a newsletter article about my library where I wanted to convince people to come use the resources, I might go and choose the creative on this. You can change it. So I went back to spinach. Started out with the nutritional benefits of spinach. Now you'll notice that even though I did a similar search on other search engines, AI-driven search engines, I'm getting much more information here from Bing than I did from the others. And it gives me suggestions for other searches. It tells me about spinach. So this is a summarization. It gives me the footnotes. Again, top level domains, not drilling down to where this actually might show up. And I said, okay, what else can you tell me about? Tell me about becoming a librarian. And it's giving me previews in the margins, which is sort of interesting. Oh, let me go back here for a minute to this. Okay. One of the other things this does, it will actually give you responses from TikTok. So let me go back up here. So Google. Google's been thinking about AI for years. It bought DeepMind in 2014, which is now combined with Alphabet, which is, of course, the parent company of Google. It has the AI Lab, which is headed by Jeff Dean. Jeff Dean is this person who fired Tim Rajebarup. And they have all these other experiments going on, and they have for a long time. You may recall Lambda. There was a Google employee who claimed that Lambda was sentient, that it had feelings. He got fired too. So they've had these experiments going on for a while, and they have said for several years that the algorithmic basis for determining search result relevancy was based first on BERT, which is another transformer program like GPT, and then BERT was superseded by MUM. The main difference was the size of the model. BARD is its answer to ChatGPT, and BARD was also kind of rushed into service. But like Bing, it's getting better. It was pretty terrible at the beginning, and it learns quickly. The question about is GPT search, unequivocally, I would say no, it is not. You can view it as a collaborator. You can view it as a virtual assistant. Really good as a brainstorming partner. Not just ChatGPT. AI-driven search, as I said earlier, predates ChatGPT. What ChatGPT is doing is adding a whole new dimension to what AI-driven search is all about. They learn from search behavior, just like traditional Google, Bing, etc. And remember, machine learning has been integral to search for years. The NLP, that's what's been disambiguating our search language and lets us equate things like cat and feline. And the personalization depends on the AI. So in Google and Bing, if you are searching as yourself, it will personalize for you, but it does it on its terms. On the newer ones, the Neva, the U.com, Brave Search, they let you choose, and it doesn't have to be the same every time. This is one of the issues with personalization in the general search engines. As information professionals, we are not always searching just for ourselves. We are rarely searching just for ourselves. We are searching on behalf of our clients, our library users. So this is a really important question. Who chooses the personalization? And all of these AI technologies, all of them, are why for the older search engines, advanced search is disappearing. It's all happening behind the scenes as the search engines learn. Well, what does it mean for our publishers? Well, first of all, it totally changes the dynamics of discoverability. Those keywords no longer are as important as they used to be. Metadata can be dynamically generated. Whole new twist on open access and the discoverability of OA articles. What about small language models? There was a blog last week, I think it was, from someone at Elsevier who said, you can keep talking about all those large language models, but for scholarly publishing, we'd actually prefer small language models, which is this whole idea of a constrained, smaller body of knowledge that is already vetted for you. But it also, however, for publishers, give them new ways to promote their journals and articles, but it raises huge, huge issues of trust and believability, and leaves publishers asking questions that I'm quite sure they never thought they would ever have to ask. Like, did a human actually write this? What about us? Well, I don't know how many of you have encountered reference questions and interlibrary loan about articles that basically don't exist because ChatGPT has hallucinated. I think there's a huge confusion about AI, LLM, and search. Those three are not synonymous. We have to understand, what is the difference between a prompt and a search strategy? Will we cease to be librarians? Will we cease to be information professionals? Will we become prompters? Prompt engineers? We have to get used to this idea of having a dialogue with content. Now, I personally think this is hilarious because that is really what we're at. Conversational search, dialogue with content. And yet, if you go back to where all of this started back years ago, to the 1990s, to the 1970s, when there was this thing called dialogue. And yeah, that was the whole idea. And it's taken this long for the technology to catch up with the philosophy. And it's going to confuse many of our users because the subscription databases are still based in Boolean. So if you're involved in bibliographic instruction, you're going to have to teach both. And within companies, the trend is more towards trying to search unstructured content instead of structured. So that adds a third level of complexity into the understanding of AI search. So that's who I am. And let me see if we have questions. So Julia, what do we have?
I'm not sure if everyone's just been scared into silence there, but
no, don't be scared. No.
Be scared. No. But I will give everyone a few minutes just to submit your questions. Or maybe I'll start off with one, because I was actually surprised to see Brave on there, because it reminded me that I joined, I think it was the open beta now, which is about 2 years ago, just to see what it was all about, because I personally use Mozilla Firefox for my browsing at home, and at work I'm using Chrome because that's what we've got on our work laptops. And I think privacy is that big question. I want to be, searching at home, and if I'm searching for a holiday, for example, I don't want to suddenly have ads everywhere saying, have you looked at this, or are you considering Greece, Italy? So yeah, with Brave and with other browsers, as the last news I heard was Brave was actually being pre-installed on certain makes and models of mobile phones. And the screenshots that you were sharing were from, I think, from desktop browsing.
Yeah.
Is there a different discussion happening with mobile browsers, and how we're looking at users are going to be searching through their mobiles compared to what we would we would
Yeah.
expect on desktop? Is there going to be a different, I mean, text speak is still around, emojis
Yeah.
could be considered a different language. What is the discussion happening around that?
Well, I think, yes, mobile is going to be very important with all of these. The trend for searching is towards mobile. So that is important for U.com, for Brave, and for Neva. They are definitely putting these in the mobile as well as the desktop. The scholarly search engines are more likely to be looking at the desktop over mobile, because the trend there is not as pronounced towards mobile as it is for the general search engines. But as more and more students do all of their research on a mobile device, you are obviously going to see developments going on there. I would point out too that a lot of these are looking at Chrome extensions, except of course Brave, which doesn't want to have a Chrome extension for obvious reasons. But that's another trend, is like, we want it front and center, and if it's an extension, it's going to be more obvious to people.
Absolutely. And there's also, separate discussions on API. What are you giving away and what are you getting back if you are putting your API out there?
Absolutely, absolutely.
We've just had a comment come in. As everyone knows, ChatGPT has been banned in Italy for prior reasons, and I think other EU countries, I think Germany was one of the ones that came out saying they are looking to follow suit and ban ChatGPT.
The banning of ChatGPT in Italy, I just found that tremendously funny, because anybody with any sense just uses a VPN and says, I'm not in Italy anymore, I'll go use ChatGPT. So it's not clear how you can actually do this in a country like Italy.
I think there is that big disconnect between what politicians understand in terms of technology and how they assume people are going to access this. So the question is, other than being an immediate knee-jerk reaction, do the other AI tools have reason to be worried if they still relatively have a low profile?
I think that's why over the years we have seen these Google killers come and go. They come in with great expectations, but honestly, getting people's attention is difficult. People do have a knee-jerk reaction, like, okay. I mean, we see that with what I said about, yes, Bing Chat is driving people to use Edge, but once they're on Edge, they then go and search Google. At this point in time, it's almost impossible to imagine an actual Google killer. It could happen, but I don't see it happening easily. What I do see is the use of the AI-driven engines in a scholarly setting, because there you're really not competing against Google. You may well be competing against subscription databases. And as library budgets shrink, you may not be able to afford a Web of Science. So maybe your alternative is Semantic Scholar. Maybe you've been simply going to Google Scholar, but Google Scholar's search capabilities are lacking. If you can get better answers from the other newer scholarly search engines, there I think Google Scholar is in trouble. Have anything else?
Not yet. I've just got another one, maybe whilst people are typing their questions. So you mentioned, I can't remember which one, but one of the search engines has started including TikTok in its results. Is this something that you see will be changing? There is, I think, one publisher that we do for news that has started incorporating tweets and using that as a kind of a meter, whether it's relevant to the search or not. But is this something that you see changing? How
Yeah, I
how a
do.
search is going to capture this, if
Yeah.
it's whatever the social media in whatever format it exists, if it's short video clips, if it's 140 characters, how would that work, and how would that help us as librarians?
TikTok is interesting. They're talking about banning TikTok in the United States. There are some countries that have banned it from government devices, government supply devices. But there's some good information that can be grabbed from TikTok, from Reddit, from Twitter. And yes, in fact, I think it was two weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, Consensus actually went down for the weekend because of tweets saying how wonderful it was. And there were enough tweets. This was from a not a librarian, but a researcher in Denmark. And he tweeted about, oh, he just loved Consensus. And it was a whole thread of tweets. And I guess he must have a lot of followers, because they all said, oh, Consensus, oh, I must go try that out. And they all went and tried it out and crashed the system. So,
That is the danger. Yeah,
yes, they do, even in our very small world.
it can happen.
So
it can happen.
it can happen. And if I don't know how the algorithms work, because of course nobody will tell you how algorithms work, but I do see a place where an algorithm could say, this is a tweet, this is a thread in Reddit, this is a TikTok that actually has value, that is not trivial, I guess is the best word I can come up with on that, and include that in the search results. The thing with Bing in particular is it pretty much took its entire system and moved it over into using the OpenAI large language model. Is it actually using ChatGPT? We're not sure. But Bing has always been a much more visual search engine in the way it presents its results. And what happened as soon as it moved over into the GPT realm, you saw more sources and you saw many more images, just as part of the homepage, as part of the search results. So yes, are things changing? Of course, yes, absolutely, they're changing.
Fab. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. First one here: how do we deal with misinformation and information literacy when search engines want us to sift through resources for us?
Yeah. That's very hard. And we have to be very alert to this. Something that I really didn't talk about here is this whole area of misinformation and totally false information. Certainly, we know that ChatGPT hallucinates in terms of citations. One of my columnists for Online Searcher, Mary Ellen Bates, is in the middle of an argument with ChatGPT because Mary Ellen has published 6 or 7 books. So she asked ChatGPT, what books have I published? And it said, you haven't published any books at all. And she said, well, what about? And she named a title, and it says, oh yes, I know that book, and gave her a different author, unconnected with that book at all. I asked it what articles I had written in Online Searcher, and it gave me 4 citations that were completely wrong. So how do you double check? You should never trust an answer from ChatGPT. If you want to use it as a prompt to get creative writing, that works wonderfully well because it's not fact-based. Factual questions to ChatGPT are difficult. I know one professor who got very upset that his students were using ChatGPT, and he has decided that all papers will be written in longhand.
Go old school, yeah, fight back.
Totally old school, exactly.
Only old school.
Yeah.
Fab. So I think I will take this as the last question, and then we will wrap up. So do you know of anyone who has started developing search protocols or search strategies for use with any of these tools, or have they included them in a strategic literature search protocol?
No. And the reason is the very nature of generative means that even if you have the exact same prompt or search strategy, however you want to define that, every time you put it in to a conversational AI search, it will generate a different answer. That's the whole nature of generative. So you can't really come up, we used to do these hedges for the really complicated Boolean searches. Does not work in the AI-driven search engine world.
I think the last just few comments, yeah, Wolters Kluwer did look at an AI tool a few years ago. I'd be interested to see which publishers do go back, and if they've got the resources to do so, how far do they get with that, and how far does that impact us as users and subscribers, library managers, people looking at contracts? Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And looking at AI a few years ago is not going to help you a whole lot today, because the AI of a few years ago was looking at machine learning. It was not looking at GPT. So anything that Wolters Kluwer looked at a few years ago may give them some guidance, but they're going to have to start all over again. And I think all the publishers are looking at it, but how they're going to use it so far, they don't seem to have a clue.
Just seen that comment. Yeah, it took them 19 months to train it for one search. So however long they last with it, however long it does last in terms of AI, we'll see.
I don't know.
But I think
It will be fascinating to see how they deal with this and what they actually do develop.
Absolutely, yeah. If it
That's
does, if it lasts, it lasts. If it doesn't,
like Wolters Kluwer, I mean, you do have a small model, and it is vetted already, so it should not hallucinate to the degree that ChatGPT does.
fab. So I will round it up here and say a big thank you to everyone that's joined us this evening. Finally, a big thank you. Thanks, Marydee, for sharing with us, and see you in Detroit. If anyone is going to be there, be on the lookout. And if you've got any more questions between whatever happens with AI between now and then, make sure you find Marydee in Detroit.